School, this is CodeRed Rules. Welcome. This is the first hand history replay of the Grinding School Cash series of 2011. So welcome, and thank you everybody who's sent in your hands, and thank you also to those who have played. To those who have sent in your hands, I may have selected one hand from each player. I'm not too sure. I just went through a bunch of hands from all the tables and just picked out some of the ones that I found interesting and gone on and talked about that. So I've got 22 hands here, 21 hands. I think I'm going to skip one of the hands, but let's go ahead and get started. Right away we see Dive All In, who's his name is Sean, so I always call him Sean. He opens up under the gun, and Pyrotos calls, and Preston 95 here is just a random fish. So what we're focusing on here is Dive All In versus Pyrotos. And I think Sean makes the correct play here in checking, and a lot of players would actually lead out here, and I think I'm going to have a couple examples of where that happens. And the reason why I don't like a lead is because, one, our opponent will bet when check 2 with the worst hand, and 2, we're not really getting a whole lot of value from these worst hands when we do bet out, although Pyrotos probably would call here with just about anything. So Sean's going to be check calling here pretty easily, although with this overcaller in the pot, it would probably deter me from wanting to call, actually. In this situation, overcalling with middle pair becomes not that correct, even though the first guy's bet out. You've got to actually beat the first and second guy here. So your best case scenario is that Pyrotos is on air and the other guy has a flush draw. So in this instance, I might actually fold here with the tens. Right, so at this point with the jacks, I think Sean is pretty much going to be forced to give up. At this point, Pyrotos should also be giving up it. And I didn't like his bet on the flop at all. And he's going to do this. I think he does this quite a bit. If we had a pair like 2s through 5s, I would love to bet, just because we actually have some fold equity against worse pairs. And our equity isn't that bad because the queen could double pair and then our hand is screwed. With the 9s, though, we don't really have that much to worry about with our opponent, and having to double barrel our opponents here, it's not going to be a good bet, given the fact that we're still three-way. So here's a bad thing about Pyrotos' bet is that when dive in check calls pre-flop, all right, on the flop, you keep in mind that he raised pre-flop and now he's checking this flop, check calling this flop. And so what does that mean? Well, if he had like aces, kings, or ace queen, he's probably going to be betting it out here with the random fish in the pot. So he's either got a really weak queen, which is unlikely given the fact that he's in position, or he's under the gun, or he's got some kind of suited connector, like that has a gut shot kind of, 10-9, Jack 10, both of which have now got there on the turn, somewhat, or he has a pair of like jacks, 10s, or 9s, and given that the Pyrotos has the 9s, the likelihood of Sean having that hand is very slim. And so therefore he's got jacks or 10s. The jacks have just boated up. So we're pretty much just trying to fold out a hand like pocket 10s. So it's not exactly that great of a play. Plus we have this other unknown random in the pot who, he's got 2/3 of the pot size bet left. So Pyrotos been enough to get him in. But as you can see here, you're drawing dead against his hand range. So it's not really something that you want to do. And Sean makes a good fold there. We could argue about folding the flop against the overcaller, but it's going to be pretty close given I don't have the stats or reads on this random guy. If this guy were a tight player, Preston 95, then we should surely be folding the flop. If he's a real big donk, then, which I'm assuming he is because he bought in for like 1/3 of the stack or whatever, then I would be more willing to call, although be very cautious because if we're behind, we're drawing the 2 outs. So, and that's it. I don't really understand Pyrotos' bets at all. And, I understand his flop bets somewhat multi-way, because if he has the best hand, giving free cards to 2 guys probably isn't going to be the best play. But his turn bet, I certainly don't like. Alright, moving on. So, here we have Pyrotos raising under the gun with 10-9 offsuit. This is not a great hand to be raising under the gun. If we're 10-9 suited, I can't complain. And then we've got a re-raise here by no deck, and then Pyrotos calls, which he always does to re-raise in this game. So I wouldn't be bluffing Pyrotos, guys, if I were you. This is obviously a very bad call. I wouldn't want to see you guys do it at all. And again, I don't know what Pyretos is doing here, floating the 10 high board. Again, I wouldn't be doing this. And then once he bings his 10, he kind of... The bad thing about raising here is he's got the 10 right, but he's representing the queen, trying to get no egg to fold her because he thinks he's got the queen. And in all honesty, like, it's very easy to put him on the queen the way this is played. But why would we like try and bluff our opponent when we have like middle pair here? If our opponent has nothing, then he's going to be folding anyway. And as you can see here, I don't even think, yeah, no egg's not folding. Ace is in a re-raised pot, so I don't think it's a very good play by Pyretos to be calling pre-flop, raising pre-flop, calling the re-raise pre-flop, calling the flop, and then jamming the turn here, all trying to represent throwing. You know what I mean? Like all this you could have saved a stack just by like folding pre-flop. Because what do you think no decks are re-raising your under the gun raise with? Like you're looking at like solely kings or better here, kings or aces, like and maybe ace king, but your equity is horrible with this hand. If you had 10-9 suited, it's better, but I mean, I would still fold. And if we had a hand like pocket 10s, pocket 9s, I could understand the call a lot more. Alright, let's go on. I'm going to try and not be a Pyretos basher the entire tournament, or I'm sorry, this entire video, just because I think a lot of times he just plays to have fun and doesn't really care what the results. So, and somebody like that, I'm going to try and, try to ignore a lot of what he does just because he's not really doing it for strat purposes and is doing it more just for funsies. So in this situation, wiki here, you should have the auto rebuy on to be up to $5. Otherwise, this is going to be pretty standard raise and call. And we're playing heads up here in this situation. Flop bet standard in both case scenarios. Now, wiki, you got to be realizing at this point, right? Dakabear is going to be a tight player, and with this kind of a rally board, we've got the queens. When he raises us on this turn, all right, Dakabear isn't Pyretos, and that's meaning on this board when we have the queens, we should be more than willing to just stack off, right? I mean, we should not be willing to just stack off, but we should be folding in the situation. Keep in mind that we raise on the gun, we see bet the flop, and we're betting in on the turn. We're representing a very strong hand: aces, kings, queens, jacks, right? Or I guess we could be having any pair of sixes through. I can bring over the poker stove here. We're representing pretty much like any pair here other than 2s through 5s, right? This is pretty much what we're representing by raising pre-flop. Maybe even a hand like ace-jack. So when our opponent raises us on this board, right, on the board of Jack 9, 8, 6, which I guess this Jack is actually a diamond, rainbow, right? When he's raising us on this board, he's representing an even stronger hand range. So possibly one, that would he raise here with pocket 6s? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like on that board, all right. If he's only going to be getting called by, say, a hand range of jacks, queens, kings, or aces, 8s, 6s, and 9s, when he does raise, all right, what hands would what hands should he be value raising in the situation? Should he be raising 6s? Well, perhaps, right, because 8s, 9s, and jacks make up 9 combinations, and then queens, kings, and aces are an additional 18. So you still have like 2-to-1 ratio here of pairs, over pairs to over sets, and so yeah, 6s would still be a value raise. But he's not going to be raising a hand like pocket 10s or anything. So I think worst case scenario here, he might have a hand like 9-8 suited, right, or Jack 9 suited, or along those lines, or 2 pair, or 7-5 suited. Like, you're either drawing the 2 outs or you're drawing dead, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I guess if he's got 2 pair here, you're drawing slightly better, but a lot of the cards that give you 2 pair also give him the boat. So I would just fold here with the queens and not be putting any more money in the pot. Now here, as played, once this 10 binks off and we kind of hit one of our outs, we go ahead and jam it all in, and then the pocket 8s fold. And I would not like this fold at all with the 8s. You'd have to put them on solely pocket queens here in the situation to make this fold. And in all honesty, like he could have like pocket 6s or something like that. I really don't know what all opponent could have here in this situation, given that he called the flop and then shoved this turn. But let's just say his hand range is exactly pocket queens and pocket sixes, where pocket queens has, you know, I mean, 6 combinations, and pocket sixes has 3, 2-to-1 ratio of us being behind. We're still getting a good enough price here that we can make the call. So we don't have to be like ahead 50% of the time. We only have to be ahead 30% of the time. And with that same scenario here, I really don't fold sets, especially on rally boards, because like these rally boards are perfect to be bluffed, and people love to bluff them. Now in this situation, you were actually right. You made a good read, and in all honesty, like we should have just folded the turn, and you should have won the hand. All right, let's go on. All right, so Sean here makes a re-raise of Pyretos with the pocket queen, which is perfectly fine. And then Pyretos again calls re-raise out of position with 10-9 offsuit. Definitely not a great play. What the real reason why I chose this hand though is the purpose behind this bet right here with the pocket queens. All right, this is more of a bluff bet in our opinion, right? Like we don't really want our opponent to draw for free to the flush draw, but our opponent doesn't always have the flush draw, right? And in all honesty, in the situation, we're likely to only get called by hands that have the ace or the flush. So I wouldn't have any problem here just checking behind and letting our opponent bluff into us. Now, again, Pyretos' call here out of position is not a great play with 10-9 offsuit because he's calling solely to bluff a later street. And what is Divalin representing pre-flop by re-raising and then betting this flop? Right? He's representing the fact that he has an ace. And trying to bluff our opponent off an ace in a future street is not going to be a great play unless we're getting a good enough price, right? The price that we're getting here to bluff on a future street is 2.5 to 1. Unfortunately, the flush card's only going to be coming around 4 to 1, so we're not going to have any implied odds in terms of a bluff. So if our opponent were betting here, say like 30 cents, right, and we're getting 5 to 1 in a call, we could actually call for the implied odds of bluffing the flush when it comes in. Now, in this scenario, we're not getting that price, and so we have to fold here, not trying to bluff on a future street. We do get lucky that the bluff card comes off for us, and Divalin has to make the fold here. Unfortunately, if he were to check behind the flop, call a turn, and then he could actually call a river bet, and see a showdown here for similar price for what we had, and Pyretos is going to have some bluffs in his range. It's hard for us to put bluffs in Pyretos' hand range because we force him to call a bet on the flop. And if we never force him to call a bet, then he can always have his entire hand range that he played with pre-flop. Alright, we can go on. Alright, so in this hand range here, Instructor Live Forever makes the under the gun or early position raise. I would just fold King Jack in this situation, but I understand the reasoning behind you wanting to play it. And then Pyretos calls out of position with Queen Jack, which is again not a great play. If it were suited, I'd be able to understand it. I do like Live Forever's check behind on this flop. And I believe post flop this is fine, although I think I was going to say that on this river, if I'm Live Forever, I would be raising Pyretos in this situation because we're only behind two very low combinations of sets and straights, and really only two combinations of straights that make any sense. So there's not really a whole lot that we're behind to, and I feel like Pyretos is going to be calling us with a lot of hands that we beat. You know, I mean, like any suited connectors that have 2 pair, he's going to be calling us with, and he's not going to be coming over the top of us without the straight. So we could very easily raise fold here 200 big blinds deep. Okie doke. No Dig raises up his 4s out of position and gets called by a random donk and small blind, and then we get re-raised here by Wiki. And the reason why I don't like this re-raise is, one, our re-raise sizing is extremely poor. Like, we can't really re-raise from 3 to 9 multi-way, when our normal re-raise here would have been 12, and then you add another caller in here, and it would be closer to like 15 big blinds, so, or even probably like 14 big blinds. So that's 60 cents. So we are, 14 times 5 is 70 cents rather. So we are a full 5 big blinds short of where we should be, and we're not going to be getting any folds. And that might be okay if we have a hand like pocket aces, right, where our opponent might make a bad call when he thinks he has set odds, but in all reality here, we don't want to be called in the 3-way pot 3 ways when we have a bluff, right, with Queen 8 suited. Once we make the re-raise though pre-flop and when we're called, we just can't give up at this point with the queen 8. I feel like we've got to represent the hand that we have, and we're going to have a lot of fold equity here. We can't really just let queen high see a showdown at this point. We're kind of just if we do that, then like the re-raise pre-flop is entirely spew. If we have no plans at all for playing post-flop, just because what's the point in really in bluffing one street when you make such a small raise and we're only going to get calls really with that small raise, and so you're kind of just building the pot with a very marginal hand. Okie doke. We got raise here by Dakabear, and Nodeg re-raises it up a decent size, and I think Dakabear makes the call. This is fair. I mean, Nodeg's been playing pretty straightforward this entire tournament, and thinking that like you don't as a Grind School member, he's going to be trying taking advantage of you, being 3-bet pots. I mean, that's okay thinking, right? But for a post flop, right, when we go ahead and raise here, what are we putting Nodeg on pre-flop for one that makes us wanting to be able to raise in a situation? So like, let's just say for example, Nodeg has a hand range of, you know, jacks are better pre-flop. This is for his value range, right? Ace king, ace queen. And he's going to have random bluffs in there too, right? Maybe he'll have like ace 8, ace 9, you know what I mean? Just like random hands in here. But against his hand range, right? If we raise here, we're folding out his ace king, his ace queens. We're folding out his bluffs, right? We're only going to be looking up, we're going to be getting looked up a hand range of exactly like aces, kings, queens, and jacks. At this point, like if our opponent had a hand like jack, really a weak jack, right? Let's say jack 8 suited that he was turning into a bluff. Once he flops this jack, though, he should be more checking rather than betting it out and inducing a bluff. So I don't really expect him to be betting on a weaker jack here all that often. In that case scenario, like what are you representing when you raise? You're representing a range of like aces, or I'm sorry, jacks are better, ace jack, maybe like 7s and 4s, and you're not going to have a jack 8 in your hand range. And so, and then you're going to also have some random like flush draws in your hand range too. So like being against this hand range, you're not really representing that much weakness, I guess. And so when you get jammed down here, I mean, your opponent's going to have pocket aces nearly all the time. And Nodeg, I mean, I don't know why he didn't just go all in this situation, which like he should have. But you know, that said, this could have been entirely prevented by just folding preflop, because ace jack doesn't do so hot against like even a wider value re-raising range of like aces or ace queen are better, jacks are better, because our opponent isn't re-raising a hand like ace jack. I'm assuming he's going to be calling, so he's going to have to have a lot of bluffs pre-flop. You know, I mean, probably, well, I mean 2-to-1 ratio, right? If he was 3-betting like around 9 or 10% of the time versus a blind steal, then we could probably make a call pre-flop with ace jack. But you know, I mean, anything less than that, right? And he's re-raising us with 4% of times. He's gonna have to be re-raising another 5 or 6% of just pure bluffs, and I don't still think it's there. I think it would prevent us by folding pre-flop. All right, here we have the pocket aces, and then we get called by the 9s, which is just fine. The first thing I'm going to say here with Nodeg's raise size, and I think this is actually one of the ones that I might have skipped, but I'm going to go over now because I've already started it. Your re-raise size here is very large. You raise it up to 18, from 4 to 18, 70 cents to call. Given the fact that you're only 570 deep, right, you could pretty much just add $5 or 57 cents onto the raise size, and I think you would have been just fine. So I think 75 cents would be the very maximum amount that I would re-raise size here too. I think otherwise you made just a massive amount. Now I want you guys to actually think for a second here and put Nodeg on a hand range before I tell you what he has, because I know what he has, and I intentionally left his hand off the hand history here, so you guys can question what he has. So let's just say here, okay, he's re-raising pre-flop, very large, and so I would really not put him on a bluff range in this situation, just because our opponent is one is Pyrotos, and Pyrotos doesn't really fold, and two, we re-raise so large that it would pretty much negate the profit of a 3-bet bluff in that scenario of a squeeze. And so whenever I see someone re-raise that large, I'm assuming it's going to be for value, just because he can't really bluff profitable at that size, and so I would just give up. At this point, though, so what does no egg have when he bet folds this flop? And if I'm Pyrotos here, I'm probably just going to be jamming it all in rather than bet check raising the 3x. But that's besides the point. So when no egg bets here and folds, like what would be the hand range that no egg could have that would make this bet? I'm going to make this bet and then fold to a raise. So we're looking at. All right, let's go ahead and clear this out. So if our opponent's re-raising pre-flop with jacks, queens, kings, or aces, ace, king, ace, queen, I mean, I would hope that he doesn't really bet queens, right, in this situation. And we're obviously not bet folding jacks or kings or aces or ace, king, really. So the really only hand range that reduces this to is our opponent has a hand like ace, queen. So how was your hand reading ability there? Because he did have ace, queen in this scenario. It is interesting. If I were no egg, the only thing I would have done differently was make a raise a smaller size. Alright, let's go on to the next hand. So this example here, we've got Dagobert raising and Pyrotos re-raising the ace-queen. It's a very marginal re-raise with the ace-queen. And otherwise I don't really have too much of a problem with it. I mean, I don't really know what Daka's calling range is or really what he's raising with in this position. I would probably, if I were Pyrotos, I'd rather just call with it. Although if it were blind versus blind, I like it more because we've already seen Dagobert call a re-raise with ace-jack. So we would obviously know then that his re-raising, and then he's going to be calling the raise with worse hands with than ace-queen. In this position, though, I would probably just be calling the ace-queen. And Dagobert 4-bets to 29 big blinds. I think it's a rather large 4-bet. I think it's on the larger end. I think it's still in the safe range of less than 30 big blinds. I feel like you could get away with probably $1.30 and have it still be okay. At this point, though, Pyrotos should just be folding the ace-queen, only because I don't really think that Dagobert's 4-bet bluffing here pretty much ever against Pyrotos, because we know Pyrotos doesn't really ever fold. And post-flop, I'm not too big of a fan the way this was played, like all the way around. So it's just really strange the way both of you guys have been playing up to this point, right? Where like once Pyrotos checks back the flop, once Daka checks the flop, everybody really knows that nobody has anything on this board in terms of, I mean, no one has a pair. Pyrotos, you might have like top set, like pocket jacks would be the only hand that you would have. Once you go ahead and call this turn, I mean, again, I don't know why Daka, you really shouldn't be betting this turn after you check the flop because it doesn't really make any sense for you either, unless you're only representing really the pocket jacks in terms of everything else you have. I think it's pretty obvious at this point that like both of you guys don't have anything, which is why I think Pyrotos calls. But the problem is like Pyrotos is calling with the worst hand. And then on the river, like Pyrotos, you should just be checking behind her if you feel like you have the best hand enough on the turn to call. And now you're representing the 9, which doesn't make any sense either because you called a 4-bet preflop with a random 9. I don't know what really hand you'd be 3-betting with preflop that has a 9 and then calling the 4-bet with a 9 too. It is all very strange the way this just played out. I would not have any problem with this where check down post flop, or if Daka you had bet the flop, or Pyrotos you had bet the flop. Like betting the flop would make the most sense if you're on post flop. So you guys are both like scared to bet the flop, but then like turn a river, you guys kind of went crazy, and I don't really understand it. And I think Pyrotos's line was probably the most strange because he's blurring his value and bluff lines quite a bit here, thinking that like he has the best hand, and he doesn't, then he does, then he doesn't, kind of thing. And it is all very confusing, and one that would have been saved a whole lot of trouble here if it just would have folded pre-flop to the 4-bet. Alrighty, in this hand, Dagobert raises the ace-5. I didn't get any hands from Nick's play, so I don't know what he has here. But the problem here, calling the re-raise out of position with ace-5 is very bad. This is not even a close play, in my opinion. And if we wanted to continue with the hand, then 4-betting to say like $1.40 would be your only play. Like you can't call here. And then post-flop, all right, we actually hit the ace, and then we go ahead and we fold it out, which is again another not correct play. Now, I'm assuming next play here actually has a hand like ace queen or ace king, which is why we can't really call with ace 5 pre-flop. But once we do call pre-flop with ace 5, and we're in a re-raise pot, and we have an SPR here of around 4-1, given that next play has only $4.38 here. So we got less than the SPR, 4-1. We have top pair and a gut shot. We really can't fold at this point. I mean, our only play is to just check call it down, hoping that our opponent has nothing, or maybe he has king queen or something. And once we hit the open ender on the turn, all right, again, our equity is just so much that we can't fold. I mean, if our opponent has a hand like ace king, then we have 8, 11 outs. I mean, it's 22% equity, and yeah, we're only getting 27.8, but you got to throw in the fact that our opponent is going to be bluffing some percentage of the time. And I would prefer to just go ahead and check call here, and then check call the river as well. I mean, that's the only way you play a top pair out of position or in a 3-bet pot. Whether you have ace jack or ace 5, the kicker in that scenario is probably going to be the same because your opponent's kickers are going to be the same. So I think it would have been saved a lot of trouble if you just folded pre-flop to the re-raise. But post-flop, once you flop top pair, you can't fold it in re-raise pot. Sorry. Alright, so Pyrtos opens up 7s, the Nakabear calls. It's a marginal call, but I feel like Pyrtos is opening up plenty of hands that we can make the call just fine. I'm not a fan at all with Pyrtos' c-bet on this board, just because we're probably only going to get called by hands that beat us, and we have very much so marginal hands. I'm sorry, and the hands that will call us that we're ahead of aren't all that marginal. They are going to have a lot of equity against us, like overcards and flush draws, overcards, gut shots, and we're not going to be able to put in any more money. At this point, like let's just say like the flop bet was a continuation bet. I'm sorry, was a value bet. We're not going to get any calls from worse hands here on this flop, right? And then we say, well, we're going to be bluffing this flop. Well, I mean, what hand's really going to be folding that beats us, right? Is an 8 going to be folding? No. Like, is a jack? Definitely not. 9s and 10s? No. It's not going to be. They're not going to be folding. And so your best bet here is, I mean, if you bet here, you're going to have to bet the turn and bet the river to try and get your opponent to fold a more marginal hand. Now, I'm not saying that it's not going to happen, but again, at this turn, it gives us more outs, right? But at the same time, like, it's a good barreling card, and I don't really know how much fold equity you're going to have on this card. And I would much prefer you have a hand like ace 10 here, with like even ace 10 offsuit, 10 of diamonds or whatever. Like, it's going to have much more equity than, say, like pocket 7s in this situation, because when we're called with ace 10, we've got so much more equity than, say, a hand like pocket 7s here. On this flop, pocket 7s only has 2 outs. Ace 10 has as many as 6. So, I mean, we're looking at so much more equity here when we have missed overs and 7s. If I were 7s, I would check call the flop, check call this turn, and probably, just river go check. But at least we give our opponent to bluff with his entire hand range. And on the turn, we probably have, either a pair is good or a flush draw is good enough that we can check all the turn profitably too. I mean, in this instance, we were pretty much smoked with the ace jack with jack of diamonds. But if we want to continue with the hand, we got to stop turning main hands into bluffs. And we're going to see our win rate go up when we let our opponent bluff and we call him off. Okay, we'll go on. So I raise up like a very marginal hand, and next play's call. The next play's call here is actually very good. I think it's perfectly fine against someone who's raising up a hell of a lot of hands. And I believe this was actually one of his first hands he played once he sat down. And it's a very interesting play by him. He made a good read on the river, but I feel like when he got there, the way that he got there wasn't very good. And my mistake was I put him on a different level than I guess I didn't level myself, but I didn't level him correctly. So my c-bet here is going to be pretty standard on a king-high board. At this point, this is where really next play should have made his maneuver rather than trying to call out of position with a hand with queen-high, right? The reason why the floating, quote-unquote, the floop float out of position, which which I covered in a podcast with Sugarnut, it's only applicable when we really have, like, overcards. Or, we have more equity here, because we potentially could be drawing dead with the queen high, or drawing very slim enough so that, like, we really can't be making the call. Now, at this maneuver, if I'm queen high, I would probably either lead out on the flop, or I would go for a check raise in this situation rather than check calling and then hoping for a better street. The reason why that I like the check raise better is because we can actually check raise bluff less on this flop, right, than it would cost us to say like call the flop and then lead out as a separate street. And what I mean by that is like it's going to cost us. Well, I guess it cost us the exact same amount that it would have. It would have been about 2 cents more, which isn't too bad. Now he's got to hope by at this point, right, that I haven't hit off a pair. And I actually feel like he doesn't really have a king all that much, or if he does, he's going to be folding to my raise. And so I do make a river raise on him, and he made a good call with the queen high, just because like my range doesn't really make any sense. I'm representing like a 10, pocket 10, something like that, and I wasn't really too worried about what I was representing as much as like, he's going to be folding everything anyway to a river raise, or he might call me with a king, but everything else is going to be folding now. I wasn't expecting a call. I was expecting to get either like shipped back or whatever, and I think if he thinks I'm bluffing, right, I think he's going to have a lot more value in a shove here on this river rather than just calling. Just because like a lot of times I'm going to be bluffing with like weaker ace highs. The fact that like queen high here, he has queen high here, it doesn't really matter. That in terms of like ace high, in terms of high card, it's just very strange. I was very surprised to see that he called with queen high, because that means I have like no fold equity at all in my play, which makes my raise not great at all, which makes my read not that great. So it was all a very interesting hand. I don't know if anybody was watching as it went down. I like my river raise. I'm not going to say that, but my read was wrong, and I realized after the fact that I was really representing absolutely nothing. Which some players, it doesn't really, it's kind of funny, because then they have another hand here where like I know I was representing absolutely nothing, but I was still getting credit on a fold. But anyway, nice read, Nick's play. Although I feel like your flop play leaves a lot to be desired. But anyway, let's go on. All right, so the jacks, the sixes, like this is the hand that I was talking about last hand, where like I'm really not representing much, but I know like I really can't get called by a whole lot. So once the pre-flop raiser checks in the scenario, right, I feel like the flop is up for grabs, and I pretty much have to be the one to, the first person to really bet here is probably going to win, right? And so I go ahead and bet it out, full well knowing that like if I'm called, I'm going to be behind. But at this point, like I feel like I might have the best hand, but there's so much money in the pot, right? 65 cents that like it doesn't really matter all that much. And so what happens here, like Captain Trent folds his 7-6, so he folds a better hand. Pyretos doesn't really have anything because he checked originally. Dive all in, he's the one who raised. Now I'm surprised that Pyretos didn't re-raise pre-flop with the ace queen, because we've seen him do that before, and it wouldn't have been that bad of a scenario. And dive all in, check calls. Now this is the funny part, right, where it's like once he check calls, or he raises pre-flop and he check calls the flop, which means he's got almost exactly like eights through queens in the scenario. And I called pre-flop, so I could have anything, including like ace king or etc. Once this 9 hits, I'm only betting like half pot, knowing that dive all in, he's either going to have like top set of kings, or set of 7, set of 3s, or he's going to have to let it go. Because if he had a king, most likely he's going to be betting. Right now I'm actually going to go through another hand with you where I actually check top pair in a similar scenario, where it actually is going to work out in my favor, because it totally hides the fact that I have that top pair. But he does in fact fold here, and so I was able to get 2 folds from worse hands just by betting like really half pot. And this is one of those few times where I will turn my hand into a bluff, is because I know that I'm just going to get so many folds. At the same time, I know that I'm behind too, that I could take it down. This is one of those things where I know I have a read on Sean, is because I coach him, so I really know like while he's playing, and I play so much with Pyretos that I know I can pretty much put him on a hand anytime. And then we have Trent, who is kind of, I don't really play with all that much, but he's really the only guy that I was worried about by betting that flop. Alright, on to the next hand here. I've got the kings, I raise them up. Trent, your call here pre-flop was very bad. Pyretos is just standard. I don't really know what next play has in a scenario. So this is the hand I was just talking about in the previous hand, where I flop an overpair on this kind of dry. I mean, it's got a flush draw, right? But I'm playing against 3 opponents who are all fairly tight, or all fairly reggish. I don't really know how Captain Trent plays. After seeing this call, I might after seeing his call pre-flop here, I might actually change my read on that. But seeing that if I bet this flop, I'm representing a very strong hand range of like ace queen or better, and like queens, kings, or aces, twos, and fives, and the flush draws. So I leave myself susceptible to be bluffed very easily when I have a very narrow hand range, and a very obvious one at that too, where it's like when you bet four-way on a dry board, right? Like, what do you have? Like, you have that top pair. Now, granted, this is a great situation if you were to bluff. Like, you're gonna get a lot of credit. So maybe I would bet here, and that's why like I would bet like my flush draws. But the thing is, I would probably only be betting like my sets and flush draws here, and I check in this situation. Not the fact that I'm worried that I'm behind, no, but like I actually want to underplay my hand here. I'm only really worried about the ace. I have the king of hearts, right? So a heart can come off, and I'm still going to be fine. And I'm able to get value now from like a hand that wouldn't have called me on the flop that binked something off on the turn, and it makes it look like now I'm bluffing, because what the hell do I really have pre-flop on this board, right? That I checked. I checked the flop, then betting two streets, right? Like, unless I might have like some. I would do this with the weak queen too, like queen 10. Queen 10 or worse, I would be betting like this. So, and I doubt I would value bet ace jack for two streets against Pyretos, although I might. I mean, it's a very slim. So Pyretos has probably put me on like really bluffy range, and it worked out for me. I mean, if the hearts come out, yeah, then it might be a little bit more dangerous. But my hand range right now is so confusing to a lot of. I mean, Pyretos doesn't really know what he can put me on, and so I'm sure it's going to be surprised when he calls me and he shows up, and I'm like, what the hell does he have kings here? He didn't bet the flop. And it's exactly what I was going for. I mean, checking top pair multi-way like this, when you're playing against a bunch of regs, that's the reason why I did it. If I was playing against, like, a really big monkey, really big fish, then checking would be pretty horrible, because he's going to be calling me. He's not really thinking about what I have. But when you've got capable opponents thinking about what you have and they're playing kind of tight, then checking the flop here is going to be a good way to get value and underplay your hand, and you're going to have a hard time putting you on a hand range coming up. Plus, if they had a queen, if anybody here had a queen after me, they'd be betting. Like, the next play would bet here the turn if he had a real hand. Trent would have he would bet the flop if he had a real hand. Pyretos, if he had a real hand, he'd bet the flop. So, I mean, once everybody checks like twice, I'm pretty sure. Obviously, I know I'm ahead, and I know I can get easy value. Alright, let's go on. Next play is in raising under the gun. I'm not a fan at all about Dakabear's call, and I'll go over it here real quick why. If Nick's plays under the gun raising range is any pair, ace king or ace queen, right? And we can even throw in king queen suited and 9 suited, just for funsies. The equity that king queen offsuit has against his hand range is very poor, around 38%. Now, since we have no money invested in the pot, we really should only be calling here when we feel like we've got when we're a favorite against our opponent's raising range. And so even if we had a hand like ace queen here, we probably would be able to make the call. But even still, like we're not winning any money by calling in a heads up pot when we need 42% equity here, and we only have. It's a break even call, I guess, with ace queen to make the call. And what's the point of making a break even play when we could fold very easily in this scenario? Now, if we were like in the blinds or whatever, when we're getting more of a discount, we need less of equity to make the call. But in all honesty, like if the worst hand our opponent's is raising us with is hands that dominate us, then we really shouldn't be calling here with king queen or really anything like worse than ace queen. Now, you could argue that I could re-raise up here the ace king, but I don't really know Nick's plays under the gun raising range. If Dakabear was a big fish, which he's not, so if he was an unknown fish, then I would make a re-raise here to isolate. But three-way like this, I really have no problems just calling, seeing a flop, and bam, I have top pair. And now I actually was debating whether or not I should be betting it out or check calling. I'm not going to be check raising, for all you know. And I ended up checking, and once Nick's plays bets, his betting range here is going to be like ace queen, ace jack, ace king, maybe king queen, and also the 9s and 8s. So I would feel like his ace queen is going to turn up as a bluff. He's going to have ace king, aces, kings, nines and eights, which is why like maybe I would prefer a lead, because if I lead out, I'm gonna get more value from like these middle queens through tens kind of hands, and his other weak kings. He might bet out. Let's say he bet out king queen suited as well. And against that hand range here, all right, ace king offsuit. I mean, it does okay. It's not exactly, I mean, something that I'm gonna be bragging home about. King queen offsuit, on the other hand, against that same hand range, is only 30% equity, and so like king queen offsuit definitely shouldn't be bragging anything. So he calls, and now I'm a little bit confused with the ace king here. Not really confused, but like I can't fold just yet. But versus a bet and a call, like top pair doesn't exactly do all that well. Now on this turn, I mean, I really didn't know what everybody had, but Nick's play, once he bets again, we can pretty much take away like ace queen out of his hand range. And now if he's got the same hand range, he might have like ace jack of clubs here, right? So we'll give him that as like a one combination of bluff. I doubt he has queens, but I could give him queens here too. All right, king queen again, still not doing that well against this hand range, and ace king is probably doing even worse now, just because the best hand I can hope for is to split. Although I guess I'm 15% to split, so that's the reason why I would be calling. So it's not necessarily a great call, but once we get called here, the Akabear's hand range is also going to be pretty much the exact same, right? He's going to have eights, nines, ace king, and king queen. He might have kings as well, and probably aces and queens. Right, so we're up against that hand range. Ace king now against all that. I guess I should probably put in the board. Would actually make a hell of a lot more sense. Otherwise, I'm just doing random equities here. I'm sorry. This is our equities here on the turn. We only got 26%. We'll throw out Daka's hand range. I'm at 20%. On the flop, I'm roughly 30% against. Well, let's go back here. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I go back because otherwise I'm mixed up the equities. King queen. That's pretty much what I said, right? Yeah. All right. So I'm 37% on the flop. The turn, I'm like 20% against Nick's play. Against both of these guys, I'm even worse. So I mean, it's a fold. One, it's a fold because I haven't really put any money in yet. I'm sorry. I've really only put in 60 cents right now, and I know that if I call this turn, right, not only is it going to cost me $1.10, but I'm going to feel like I'm going to be committed in this big $5 pot. And if I call this turn here, I'm assuming that I would be ahead of Nick's play, and if he's going to be jamming in any river here, which he should be jamming rather than betting half pot. I feel like he should have bet more on this turn so he can jam the river with his set. Dakabear was smart enough to not raise him at any point, but he would have saved a lot of money had he just folded pre-flop and not even bothered to play. Nick's play should have gotten the rest of the stack in if he would have bet correctly. Only because Dakabear really isn't going to be calling down without two pair or better. Like he's not calling with like king jack. So I would, and like the difference between maybe going all in would be getting ace king to fold, but king queen, pocket eights, those hands are still going to be calling. So you don't really have that much more. He's not going to be folding that many more hands to an all in than say like betting the amount that you did bet. But anyway, let's go on to the next hand. Raising the threes is fine. Calling the queens is just fine. Pyrotos' call a little loose. If he were on the button, I'd like it. And the nines is fine. So here we go, guys. We have a six-way pot. How do we play which hands here? What should be going down? Well, if I'm weaky, I'm pretty much check folding. If I'm Dakabear, I'm check folding. Nick's play, he can be betting. Of course, he's got top pair. Pyrotos will be calling. Otherwise, it's going to be heads up. So at this point, we got to realize, all right, Nick's play, call only done raise, betting this flop. His hand range would be like ace queen or ace king, 5, 10s, jacks, maybe ace jack. Pyrotos is going to have a very similar hand range. All right, so on this turn, we're going to be betting. Pyrotos is going to be calling. And on the river, I don't really understand what Pyrotos is doing representing the ace. I guess he's representing exactly king queen, which is highly possible. But he's turning now like a made hand to a bluff, thinking like, I think it's gonna be bluff. Because I can't understand why it'd be for value. But when you're representing a hand like King Queen, and you're really only gonna get a hand like Pocket Queens to fold, I don't understand. I guess I just don't get. I don't get the all in. I really don't. I don't know how to defend it. I really can't describe it. Turning a jack here, seemingly into a bluff. I don't know how else to play other than it's just not very good. And Pyretos should have just checked behind the river. We're trying to go for pot control. We're not trying to get stacks in with top pair, or in this case, second pair. Yeah, just go ahead and check behind, please. And next big play made a decent call, which I'm surprised. I probably would fold here with the queens, because there's really only a couple hands that we could ever have in the situation that we would be folding to Pyretos' all in. Because our other hands would be like Ace Jack, Jack 10, of which we're not folding. And so the other two hands we would have would be like Pocket Queens and Pocket Kings. So I don't think Pyretos really has enough equity on a bluff in this scenario. Very strange, very strange. Plus, Pyretos has to reduce the likelihood of Pocket Queens just because he has a queen himself. I don't see it. Okay. Dagobert makes the raise. We got Pyretos calling the raise and the re-raise, which is fair. You know, he's getting a decent amount of implied odds. I've got the biggest question I have here is Dagobert's 4-bet size in this situation. He's 4-bets to like 49 big blinds. That's just way too large in the scenario. Now, granted, we are 250 big blinds deep. In that scenario, okay, it's okay to re-raise larger. I wouldn't re-raise that large, though. I think re-raising it to around $1.30 would be fine. Like when you're 200 big blinds, you can take care of the 30. You can go a little over 30 big blinds, especially multi-way. We give our opponent really $1.20 to call. We're looking at $1.50, $1.65, anywhere between $1.35 and $1.65. I would not have pretty much any questions about. 245 making it this large is just kind of insane, and that's really all I have to say. Because everybody folded pre-flop. All right, so I'm raising the ace of the gun, and Wiki calls it King Queen, and we've already gone through this scenario with no hands you should be calling with, given my I did it with Nick's play, but our range is gonna be pretty similar under the gun. And calling 3 streets down at this point is not necessarily that great. Now, I want to say something about my value bet here on the river. I know it's thin, right? But you guys can't be too afraid of pocket sevens calling like the flop and the turn. And if I get raised, yeah, like I'm folding. But at the same time, like my opponent likely has ace queen and king queen, pretty much exclusively at this point. So it's very easy value bet for me. I feel like if he has king queen, though, he should be folding at this point, just because I'm not really bluffing, right? I mean, this board is so dry. I would see what the flop, but the turn is just a bad bluffing card, and I don't really know what I would be bluffing with though at this point. So I would fold the river if I'm wiki here. I would have folded pre-flop, but if I have ace queen, I mean it would be a very tough call on the river with ace queen. I might make the call with ace queen, probably because we're gonna be splitting the pot a lot. But with king queen, I probably do fold. All right. So we've got a raise. I raise under the gun. We get a min re-raise here. And what does min re-raise represent? Min re-raise represents, pretty much jacks are better, right? Jacks, queens, kings, aces, or potentially even kings or aces. Captain Trent, you make a good call here with the implied odds. That's fine. I'm not a fan of Wiki's re-raise, though, with his ace-king suited, because he's really over-repping his hand, doing it for value. Unless he knows something about Celt that I don't. But facing a raise and a re-raise in front, I think ace-king suited becomes a very easy call at this point. And then probably post-flop here is kind of standard with the overs and the flush draw, calling it off. But if I'm Wiki, I'm just calling pre-flop rather than 4-betting under the gun and then a min re-raise of the under the gun raise. Alright, so Dagobert opens it up. That's fine. We don't really have a read on Tina, so Dagobert calls out of position. That's just fine. Keep in mind, guys, that we are over 200 big blinds deep. On this board, alright, he checks. We should not be betting here. All right, because our opponent's checking behind a hand like Ace King, which that's fine. He's gonna check behind like nines, jacks, and queens. You know what I mean? Like all these kind of set hands or whatever. If we were to check, we could very easily just check call and have no problem with it. So I don't like the bet because we're gonna get raised off our hand. Now we have to call because we're getting decent equities, and then we should just check fold the river. So in my opinion, I would have just check called the turn, and that would have been it. Then we check fold the river. Alright, so these are both standard, raising ace king, calling the fours. Again, this is also kind of standard, right? Like maybe we could argue not c-betting against Pyretos because Pyretos never folds. But otherwise, Pyretos' call is actually pretty good here. I'm not a fan of this barrel at all with ace king because the board hasn't changed. Pyretos isn't folding. If we feel like we're ahead, then we would just check call it, and Pyretos just checks it down. So Pyretos plays his hand fairly well, and Sean, I don't like the turn barrel. All right, last hand. Isolating up the ace queen. I make probably a bad call with 7-6 suited, but I'm in position. Obviously, I'm folding. So these are kind of unknowns, and I like Sean. The fact that Sean did raise here. I'm not a fan of the raise sizing, right? Because he probably would have c-bet this amount to 80 cents into the dollar pot. But now that two players are in it, we probably should be making it $1.20 instead. And if we get chipped over the top, then we would just be folding. And on the turn, call would be fine, and the river call is fine as well. So well played, Sean. Pretty much close up, other than the raise size on the flop. That's pretty much the only question that I have. So thank you guys for listening. This has been CodeRed Rules. Hopefully you guys have learned something, and hopefully I've explained what I've thought would be the correct play on all these hands. So I welcome your feedback. Thanks you guys for playing. See you guys next time. Good luck at the tables.